everyone, welcome to this internally screening review of the Town That Dreaded Sundown. Today we are continuing with Hooptober with this 1976 film directed by Charles B. Pierce, loosely based off the Texarkana Moonlight murders and the Phantom Killer. It's kind of an interesting film in that it feels far more of a throwback to noir storytelling than many of the films of the 70s that I've seen, at least, with a consistent narration throughout. It almost feels like an episode of Unsolved Mysteries or something where you're kind of being narrated through various events in which the Phantom Killer sprang up, did some bad stuff, and moved on to his next victim. And so it's kind of slightly episodic in that nature, kind of taking you through, introducing the characters as you would, but then kind of having them kind of chunked out. So Rupert, what did you make of the Town That Dreaded Sundown?
I was quite disappointed by this film. It's not exactly a classic, unless classic just means old, in which case it is old. I think this is probably a film that was spawned out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre hype at the time. Could be wrong there, but it's a 70s slasher film, so it's a pretty early slasher film. And why I found it disappointing is I think it, at its core, has something interesting to offer, and I think if it was executed better, I would have enjoyed it more. And that is, like you said, it has this sort of interesting narration angle to it. It kind of made me think, within the first scene, I was like, this could be interesting, because it's kind of offering this kind of weird omnipresent following of events where it's like, this is just what happened, and that could be really creepy.
Yes.
And interesting. It's not something I've ever really seen done, because a lot of slasher films tend to be either very heavily ensemble based or very heavily like character based. So if you think of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's got like an ensemble of characters who eventually get killed off until you have the final girl, which is kind of like the classic template.
Yeah.
You do sometimes get inversions of that. Like for example, I think like an extreme weird inversion of a slasher film to the point where it's not a slash film anymore would be something like Zodiac, which is kind of like not even a slash film. It's more of like a mystery drama thing.
Yeah.
But it's still but it still has a sort of lot of slasher elements to it in the way it sort of presents these kills sort of over and over again, and you have one person pursuing it. And this film could have sort of done like a weird middle ground between the two, where it sort of has this creepy, like I said, sort of omnipresent view of everything. And it's not without its merits. I think there are some interesting bits of violence here and there, but it really drags itself down in really glacial pacing, terrible humour, like really cringy.
My God, yes.
A lot like the police hijinks where they're like dressing up in drag, and like it really kind of spoils the mood. 100%. And I think a film like this has to be very dependent on atmosphere, and I don't think it offers it up enough to make itself worthwhile.
Yeah. I think there's something kind of oddly mundane about a lot of the kills that I found kind of disappointing. I mean, when something is kind of trying to base itself off real life, it's hard to know, are they purposefully telling these things as truthfully as they can? So for example, the opening scene, the killer just kind of beats up this couple in a car, and there's not really much consequence to it. It instills fear in the town, but he hasn't killed anyone yet. It feels like a strangely cold opening to the film, where you just kind of get some pretty plain representation of violence with a man with a bag on his head, and then that's kind of that.
Well, I kind of in a way liked that, but I felt like it was the kind of thing I would like if the film sort of continued at that with an angle.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not spectacular, but there is a sort of interesting nature to the way it's sort of quite sort of standard,
I suppose. I think what would be interesting is if this wasn't presented in okay, now we cut to this date. Oh, now we cut to this date. If we did spend time with characters, like you say, and kind of maybe the two victims at the beginning survive. So if maybe you get to spend time with those victims and then get to live in the world where the dread of the presence of this killer, this violent psychopath exists, and like the gradual decline in the mental well-being of the entire town, that would be a really great way of introducing and building tension. And instead you just kind of go, right, now we're at the bit where he does this other thing, and this time there's a couple of policemen, they kind of see it from the distance, and he chases him in the rain, and that's kind of it. There's just not much that's compelling about the violence.
No.
There's one moment, coming back to what you said about goofy humour, where he has cornered a woman, she's like tied to a tree, and he has like a trumpet or a trombone.
Yeah.
And he attaches a knife to it, and then just like stabs it into her back, and he pretends to play it. And it just feels really forced. There was a kind of goofiness and silliness to when he picks it up, and you're kind of like, oh my God, what's he going to do with this? But then when it actually plays out, it feels kind of it's so flat and just kind of sad. It feels like they were really trying for something that they completely missed the mark on.
Yeah, I do think there are points of compelling violence. For example, in that scene, I do agree the way it ends is like really what?
Yeah.
But I do kind of like how prolonged that whole scene is, and how you just kind of see these two people just like begging for their lives, and then they just get killed. There is a kind of interesting brutality to that, and there's also that bit where he goes into the house and he shoots that.
Oh yes, that's true.
Is it? I can't remember. Is it a woman or a man? He like shoots him in the face.
Yeah.
And it's quite sort of grim and interesting in that way. But I just think overall the film is just not very well made.
No.
Like, the violence is shown is not. It's not always terrible, but it's generally not that striking. There's no strong characterization. Like you said, the only person they really stick with is the policeman, who I think is probably the character you should stick with if you're going to make a film like this. But he's not very interesting.
No.
He's just kind of like generic, handsome American policeman. The villain, he just doesn't really have that much presence. He's kind of like the beta test of Michael Myers, right? So,
right, yeah. That feels, that's a good...
Who is obviously much more, because you have John Carpenter making that film and it's obviously much better made, it just works better. So yeah, I just don't think this film really offers enough to be worth watching.
I mean, to be as flat and blunt as possible, it is just terribly boring.
Very boring.
And doesn't offer you anything that you couldn't get anywhere else at far superior qualities. The villain is one-dimensional, boringly designed. Like, I know, again, it's a strange thing when it's based off real life. I don't know a huge amount about the murders it was based on, but I can't tell, is the design work here based off reality, or is it...
I think it is supposed to be like heightened reports.
Because I feel like if you're going to do a based on, you may as well just heighten it, because you're not making a documentary. If you've got to catch up, oh, he wore a bag on his head, make it darker, make it weirder, make it more striking, because he has so little going for him. Characterization is flimsy and basically barely present. People that just kind of walk into a scene, I am policeman number one, I am policeman number two, I am victim number one, I am victim number two. There is no, like, there's nothing to really invest yourself in. The only thing that is the real compelling hook of any of it is the narration kind of guiding you through and kind of feeding you new bits of information that should be more compelling than it is. It should be like an Unsolved Mysteries thing, because those shows can be really interesting where they're sort of drip feeding you cool tidbits of information. This just presents it in the flattest, most colourless way possible.
Yeah, I don't know if I hate it as much as you seem to, but it was very boring. At the end of the day, I can't really recommend this film just based on the fact that I read the Wikipedia page for the real killings. And it was about 10 times more entertaining. Interesting. I should say, not entertaining. Like, there's a whole lot of details about like how the police force trying to investigate it wouldn't investigate certain certain suspects because they were black, and they thought, oh, they wouldn't be smart enough to commit the crime and get away with it. That would be an interesting plot line for a film like this. Obviously, maybe in the 70s they wouldn't do it. But,
well, the fact they avoid that entirely, pretty much.
Yeah, is a weirdly sort of, pointed omission, if you want.
Yeah, for sure.
It feels like a really wasted opportunity on quite an interesting real life story that could have been much better made. That's all I can really say. I guess I like a lot of the sort of semi-cooked concepts of what they're going for, but I can only give it so much credit for trying.
You know what? The more we talked about this, the more I've realised just how little this film has to offer. So, what do you reckon you would?
I gave it a 4. Talking about it, I do dislike it more, but I rated it a 4 on my letterbox, so therefore I have to stand true. Okay. Yeah. That's fair. I am retroactively downgrading my letterbox score to a 3. Okay, fair enough. Because I see very little of value here, and if you're interested in slasher films, you can get far better before this era and immediately after this. You know, the 70s, while a formative period for the genre, have 2 of the most classic films in it, and you'd be far better off watching either of those than this. This doesn't really have any value as kind of a cult curio where I just wouldn't recommend it. It's not got any style of its own, any kind of visual. I wouldn't say it has no style of its own, but it has a very weak style. Right. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. That's a fairer way of putting it. But yeah, I'm sorry to be such a downer, but
that has been our review of The Town That Dreaded Sundown. I don't expect many likes on this one. So if you dislike this video, dislike it. Remember to click unsubscribe and confirm when you unsubscribe. And we'll catch you again for our next review coming shortly. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Peace.